She stood at the edge of town wrapped in a threadbare shawl, three small faces pressed against her skirts as the November wind howled through Wyoming territory. The boarding house had just turned them away, the fourth place that week. Her youngest daughter's lips had turned blue, and her son hadn't spoken in 2 days from the cold that had settled deep in his chest. "My children are cold," she whispered to no one in particular, as dawn broke over the frozen plains. What she didn't know was that a man had been watching from across the street, a cowboy who'd spent 15 years building a ranch with no one to share it with, who'd given up on the idea of family, who'd convinced himself that a life alone was all he deserved. He would change everything for them, and in saving them, he would finally save himself. But first, she would have to survive the worst winter of her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The train had dumped them in Cheyenne, Wyoming on a bitter November morning in 1891. Carolyn Fletcher stood on the platform with her 3 children, 2 carpet bags containing everything they owned, and exactly $4.37 to her name. Her oldest, Thomas, was 8 years old, with his father's dark hair and solemn eyes that had seen too much too soon. 6-year-old Anna clung to her mother's hand, her small body shivering in a coat 2 sizes too small. And little James, just 4, rode on Caroline's hip, his breathing raspy and labored from the illness that had started 3 days ago on the train. They'd come from Philadelphia, or rather, they'd fled from Philadelphia. Caroline's husband, Michael Fletcher, had died 6 months earlier in a factory accident at the textile mill where he'd worked. The machinery had malfunctioned, and Michael had been caught in the gears trying to fix it. He'd died instantly, leaving Caroline with 3 children, mounting debts, and a landlord who gave her exactly 30 days to vacate their small apartment. She'd tried to stay. God, how she'd tried. She'd taken in laundry, worked at a bakery before dawn, sewed buttons on coats until her fingers bled. But Philadelphia was expensive, and jobs for widowed women with small children were scarce. The city that had been her home for 10 years suddenly felt like a trap closing around her. Then she'd heard about the West. People said there were opportunities out there, that a person could start fresh, that land was cheap and work was available. Her brother's friend had written letters about Wyoming territory, about how towns were growing and families were needed. So Caroline had sold everything that wasn't essential, bought 4 train tickets, and headed west with hope as her only real currency. That hope died somewhere around the 3rd day of travel, when James's cough turned into something worse, when their food ran out and she had to water down the last of their bread to make it stretch, when other passengers moved away from her children as if poverty were contagious. Now, standing in Cheyenne with the wind cutting through their inadequate clothing, Caroline felt the full weight of her mistake. She'd brought her children into the wilderness with no plan, no connections, and winter bearing down on them like a predator. "Mama, I'm cold," Anna whimpered, pressing closer. "I know, sweetheart. We'll find somewhere warm soon." But where? She'd tried the boarding house first, the one her brother's friend had mentioned in his letters. Mrs. Paulson had taken one look at Caroline's worn dress, her 3 exhausted children, and the desperation in her eyes, and shaken her head. "I run a respectable establishment. I can't have sick children spreading illness to my other boarders. And frankly, Mrs. Fletcher, you don't look like you can afford my rates." Caroline had swallowed her pride. "Please, just for tonight. My son needs warmth. I can pay. $4 won't even cover half a week here. I'm sorry, but I have a business to run." The door had closed in her face. The second place, a smaller boarding house near the train depot, had been even less sympathetic. The owner had looked at James's flushed face and raspy breathing and said flatly, "No sick children. Try the church." The church had been locked. The third place had simply said they were full, though Caroline could see empty rooms through the windows. By the 4th rejection, she understood. No one wanted a desperate widow with 3 children and no money. She was a liability, a burden, a problem no one wanted to inherit. As night fell on that first day in Cheyenne, Caroline found shelter in an abandoned storage shed behind the general store. It wasn't much, rough wooden walls with gaps that let the wind through, a dirt floor, no heat, but it was better than the street. She gathered her children close, wrapping them in every piece of clothing they owned, using their bodies' shared warmth as their only defense against the freezing temperature. "Tell us a story, Mama," Anna whispered, her teeth chattering. So Caroline told them about summer days in Philadelphia, about the park where they'd played, about their father's laugh. She talked until her voice grew hoarse, until Thomas and Anna finally fell asleep, until only James remained awake, his small body burning with fever against her chest. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her sleeping children, though she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. "I promise we're going to be okay." The next morning, Caroline left her children huddled in the shed and went looking for work. She tried the hotel, the restaurant, the saloon, the mercantile. Every door opened with hope and closed with rejection. "We need someone who can work full days, not a mother who has to run home to children." "Sorry, ma'am, but we can't have kids underfoot. Come back when your young ones are in school." By noon, she'd been turned away from 7 establishments. Her feet ached from walking in shoes with holes in the soles. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She'd given the last of their food to the children that morning. She found herself standing in the town square, surrounded by people going about their business, and felt more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. In Philadelphia, at least she'd had neighbors who knew her, shopkeepers who'd let her run a tab, a community that had watched her children grow up. Here, she was invisible. Just another desperate soul who'd come west chasing dreams that didn't exist. That afternoon, as storm clouds gathered overhead promising snow, Caroline made a decision that terrified her. She walked to the telegraph office and composed a message to her sister in Boston. "Situation desperate, stop, cannot feed children, stop, please send help, stop." The telegram cost 75 cents. Money she couldn't afford to spend, but pride was a luxury she no longer possessed. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked at her with something like pity. "Response will take at least 2 days, ma'am, probably longer with the storm coming." 2 days. She had to keep her children alive for 2 more days. Caroline used another precious 50 cents to buy a loaf of day-old bread and a small jar of milk. She returned to the shed to find Thomas trying to keep Anna and James warm, his young face set with determination that broke her heart. "I'm the man now, Mama," he said seriously. "Papa would want me to take care of everyone." Caroline pulled him close, fighting tears. "You're 8 years old, Thomas. You're supposed to be a little boy, not a man." But the West didn't care about supposed to be. It only cared about survival. That night, the storm hit. Snow fell in sheets, driven by wind that howled like wolves. The shed offered almost no protection. Caroline wedged clothing into the gaps in the walls, but the cold seeped through everything. She held her children against her, all 4 of them huddled together, sharing body heat and prayers. James's fever worsened. His breathing became more labored, each inhale a rattling struggle. Anna cried from the cold until exhaustion claimed her. Thomas lay silent and still, trying to be brave, trying to be the man his mother had lost. "Please," Caroline whispered into the darkness, to God or fate or anyone who might be listening. "Please don't let my children die like this. They deserve better. They deserve so much better." The wind screamed in response, and snow piled against the shed walls. Caroline must have dozed because she woke to pale dawn light filtering through the gaps in the walls. Her body was numb from cold. Anna and Thomas were still asleep, pressed against her sides. But James was too still, too quiet. Panic seized her. She shook him gently. "James, baby, wake up." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with fever. His lips had a bluish tint that terrified her. "Mama," he whispered, "I'm so cold." "I know, baby, I know." She had to do something. She couldn't just sit here and watch her son die, even if it meant begging, even if it meant humiliation, even if it meant anything. She had to get help. Caroline wrapped James in every warm thing she could find, left Thomas with strict instructions to keep Anna close and warm, and ventured out into the early morning cold. Snow had transformed Cheyenne into a landscape of white silence. Her shoes, already inadequate, were useless against the ankle-deep drifts. She walked toward the main street where smoke rose from chimneys and the promise of warmth beckoned. People were beginning to emerge, shopkeepers sweeping snow from their doorsteps, ranchers heading toward the livery. Caroline approached the first person she saw, a woman in a fine wool coat. "Please, my son is sick. He needs a doctor. The woman hurried past without making eye contact. Caroline tried again with a man unloading supplies from a wagon. "Sir, please, do you know where I can find a doctor?" "My little boy, Doc Patterson's office is on 3rd Street, he said gruffly, not looking at her. "But he don't work for free." 3rd Street. Caroline stumbled through the snow, her feet so cold she could barely feel them. She found the doctor's office, a small building with a painted sign, and knocked frantically on the door. A middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gray beard opened the door. "Yes?" "Please," Caroline gasped. "My son, he's 4 years old. He has a terrible fever. He can barely breathe." "I don't have money, but I'll work. I'll do anything." Dr. Patterson held up a hand. "Slow down. Where's the boy?" "In a shed behind the general store. Please, you have to help him." Something flickered across the doctor's face. Concern, perhaps, or pity. "Show me." They made their way through the snow, Caroline's heart pounding with desperate hope. Maybe this man would help. Maybe James would be okay. Maybe... They arrived at the shed to find Thomas standing guard outside, his face pale with cold and fear. "Mama, Anna's shaking real bad, and James won't wake up right." Dr. Patterson ducked into the shed, and Caroline followed, watching as he examined James with professional efficiency. He listened to the boy's chest, felt his forehead, checked his pulse. When he looked up at Caroline, his expression was grave. "This boy has pneumonia, possibly bronchitis on top of that. He needs to be somewhere warm immediately, with constant care, medicine, proper food. If he stays in these conditions another night, I can't promise he'll survive." The words hit Caroline like physical blows. "What do I do? Tell me what to do." "You need shelter, Mrs. Fletcher." "Caroline Fletcher. Mrs. Fletcher, your children need warmth, food, and medicine. That's not negotiable if you want them to survive. I've tried every boarding house. No one will take us." Dr. Patterson's jaw tightened. "Let me see what I can do. I'll ask around, see if anyone has space. But in the meantime," he pulled out a small bottle from his bag. "This is for the fever. 2 drops in water 3 times a day. And here." He produced a wrapped package from his coat. "Bread and cheese. Feed your children." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "I can't pay you." "I'm not asking you to. Just keep that boy warm as you can until I find you proper shelter." After the doctor left, Caroline fed her children and administered the medicine to James. The bread and cheese disappeared in minutes, her children's hunger painful to witness. She held James close, feeling his small body burn with fever, and wondered how much longer she could keep fighting. Hours passed. The storm resumed, dumping more snow on Cheyenne. No one came. Dr. Patterson didn't return. Caroline began to understand that even his kindness had limits. What could one doctor do against a town that had already decided her family wasn't worth helping? As afternoon faded toward evening, Caroline faced the terrible reality. They might not survive another night. James was getting worse despite the medicine. Anna had developed a cough. Even Thomas's strength was flagging. She made a desperate decision. She would take her children to the church, break in if necessary, seek sanctuary in the only place that was supposed to help the helpless. Caroline gathered their few belongings and bundled her children as best she could. Thomas carried one bag while Caroline carried James and led Anna by the hand. They trudged through snow that came past Anna's knees, each step an agony of cold and exhaustion. The church stood at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a white steeple. Caroline tried the door, locked. She pounded on it, her fist numb from cold. "Please, someone please help us." Nothing. The church was empty. Caroline sank down on the church steps. Her children huddled against her and finally let herself break. Tears froze on her cheeks as she held her babies close. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry I brought you here. I thought we could have a better life. I thought—" "Mama, don't cry," Anna whispered, her small hand touching Caroline's face. "Papa's in heaven. Maybe he's sending help." Caroline didn't have the heart to tell her daughter that help wasn't coming, that the world was cruel and indifferent, that their father's death had set them on a path that ended here, freezing on church steps in a town that didn't care if they lived or died. She pulled her children closer, sheltering them with her body against the wind. "My children are cold," she whispered to the gathering darkness, to the God she wasn't sure was listening, to anyone who might hear. "Please, someone, my children are so cold." The wind howled, snow continued to fall, and Caroline Fletcher closed her eyes, holding her babies tight and prepared for the worst. What she didn't see was the figure standing across the street, watching. A tall man in a sheepskin coat, his weathered face hidden by his hat brim. He'd been there for several minutes, observing this desperate family, wrestling with something inside himself. His name was Daniel Cooper, and he was about to make a decision that would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel Cooper had been in town to buy supplies when he first noticed them. The woman with 3 children going door to door, each rejection visible in the slump of her shoulders. He'd watched from outside the livery as she'd been turned away from the boarding house, seen the desperation in her eyes as she'd clutched her sick child. Something about the way she held that boy, fierce and protective despite her obvious exhaustion, had stirred something in Daniel's chest that he'd thought dead for 15 years. He was 42 years old, a rancher who'd built a successful spread 30 miles north of Cheyenne through backbreaking work and stubborn determination. His ranch, the Triple Creek, sprawled across 3,000 acres of Wyoming grassland with a solid ranch house, a sturdy barn, livestock that thrived, and an emptiness that had grown heavier with each passing year. Daniel had come west in 1876, running from a broken engagement back in Kansas. Elizabeth Hartwell had been his world until the day she'd called off their wedding, standing in her parents' parlor with tears streaming down her face. "I can't do it, Daniel," she'd said. "I can't marry someone who wants to disappear into the wilderness. I need civilization, society, a proper life, not some ranch in the middle of nowhere." He'd left Kansas the next day and hadn't looked back. For 15 years, he'd poured everything into building his ranch, convincing himself that land and cattle were enough, that he didn't need anyone, that the solitude was what he'd chosen. But watching this woman on the church steps, hearing her desperate whisper carried on the wind, "My children are cold," Daniel felt the walls he'd built around his heart crack open. He'd spent his whole adult life alone because one woman had rejected his dreams. Meanwhile, this woman was fighting for her children's survival with a courage that put his self-imposed isolation to shame. Daniel crossed the street, his boots crunching in the snow. Caroline didn't hear him approach until he was standing directly in front of her. "Ma'am," he said quietly. Caroline's head jerked up, her eyes wide with fear and hope. "Please, we're not causing trouble. We'll move along. We just—" "How long since those kids ate a proper meal?" The question surprised her. 3 days, maybe 4. Daniel nodded once as if confirming something to himself. Come with me. I don't have money to pay for. Wasn't asking for money. Was offering help. His voice was gruff, unused to extended conversation. Now you can sit here and freeze, or you can trust a stranger. Your choice. Caroline looked at her children, Thomas barely conscious from cold, Anna's lips blue, James's labored breathing, and made a decision born of desperation. What do you want in return? Nothing you're thinking, Daniel said, understanding immediately. I got a ranch north of here, big house, plenty of rooms, warm fires, food in the pantry. Your boy needs a doctor, but first he needs warmth. I can provide that. Why would you help us? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Because 15 years ago someone needed help and nobody stepped up. I ain't making that mistake again. He didn't wait for her response. Instead, he scooped James into his arms with surprising gentleness, the boy's small body nearly disappearing against Daniel's broad chest. Can the others walk to the livery? It's 3 blocks. Thomas struggled to his feet. I can walk, and I'll help Anna. Daniel studied the boy with something like respect. Good man. Your mama raised you right. At the livery, Daniel's wagon was already loaded with supplies. He set James gently in the back on a pile of blankets, then lifted Anna up beside him. Thomas climbed in on his own, though Daniel noticed the trembling in the boy's legs. Caroline hesitated at the wagon. I don't even know your name. Daniel Cooper, own the Triple Creek Ranch. I'm Caroline Fletcher. These are my children, Thomas, Anna, and James. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Fletcher. Now get in before we all freeze. The ride north took over 2 hours through deepening snow. Daniel drove in silence while Caroline held James and kept the other children warm. The landscape was stark and endless, rolling prairie interrupted occasionally by distant mountains. Caroline wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake trusting this stranger, if she'd just traded one danger for another. But when James coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made her heart clench, Daniel's jaw tightened and he urged the horses faster. A man who cared about her son's cough couldn't be planning anything evil, could he? The Triple Creek Ranch emerged from the snow like salvation. The house was larger than Caroline had expected, 2 stories of solid timber with smoke rising from 2 chimneys. Outbuildings dotted the property, a massive barn, a bunkhouse, storage sheds. Fences stretched into the distance, and even in the storm, Caroline could see this was a working ranch, successful and well-maintained. Daniel pulled up to the main house and jumped down. Get the older 2 inside, I'll bring the sick one. The interior was warm, blessedly, miraculously warm. A fire roared in the stone fireplace, and the rooms were furnished simply but comfortably. Caroline stood in the entryway, dripping snow on polished wooden floors, and felt her knees weaken with relief. Daniel carried James to a bedroom on the first floor and laid him on the bed. Get those wet clothes off him. There's dry things in the chest. They'll be too big, but they're warm. I'll stoke the fire higher and get food started. Over the next hour, Caroline witnessed efficiency born of necessity. Daniel built up fires in 3 rooms, heated water on the stove, and produced a simple but hearty stew from his well-stocked pantry. He worked with minimal words but maximum competence, a man accustomed to doing everything himself. The children ate like they were starving, because they were. Thomas managed 3 bowls before his eyelids began to droop. Anna fell asleep at the table, her spoon still in her hand. James took a few bites, his fever still raging, but at least he was warm. Daniel watched them with an expression Caroline couldn't quite read. Your boy needs that doctor. Storm should break by morning. I'll ride to town. Bring Doc Patterson back. I still can't pay. Stop saying that. Daniel's voice was sharp. I got money. You got sick kids. Money's for using, and right now, it needs to be used for a doctor. Caroline felt tears building again. Why are you doing this? Daniel was quiet, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. 15 years ago, I was engaged to Mary. She chose society over me, and I came west angry and alone. I built all this. He gestured to the house around them, but I built it empty. No wife, no children, no laughter, no life. Just me and my pride and my cattle. He turned to face her. I watched you today, fighting for those kids, refusing to give up even when you had nothing left. You got more courage in your little finger than I've had in my whole life. So I'm helping because maybe, just maybe, there's a reason I built this big empty house. Maybe it was meant for more than just one bitter man living alone. The next morning, Daniel rode through clearing skies to fetch Dr. Patterson. The doctor arrived within 3 hours, examined James thoroughly, and administered proper medicine. He'll recover, Patterson said, but it was close. Another night in that shed, and we'd be having a different conversation. As the doctor left, he pulled Daniel aside. You did a good thing, Cooper. Town's been talking about this family, widow with 3 kids, no money, nowhere to go. Most folks just shook their heads and moved on. You actually did something. Town talk, Daniel muttered. Bunch of folks with opinions and no action. Over the following days, a routine emerged. Daniel handled ranch work during the day while Caroline tended the children and slowly took over household tasks. She cooked meals, cleaned rooms that had gone years without a woman's touch, mended Daniel's clothes that were torn and neglected. Thomas followed Daniel everywhere, fascinated by ranch life, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and land management. Daniel, initially uncomfortable with the attention, gradually warmed to the boy's genuine interest. Your pa teach you about ranching? Daniel asked one afternoon as they fed the horses. No, sir. Papa worked in a factory. He died when the machines broke. Daniel's hands stilled. That's hard. How you holding up? Thomas shrugged with forced casualness. Mama needs me to be strong. I'm the man of the family now. You're 8 years old. You're allowed to be sad. The boy's facade cracked. If I'm sad, Mama gets more worried. She's got enough to worry about. Daniel knelt down to Thomas's level. Listen to me. Being strong doesn't mean not feeling things. It means feeling them and keeping going anyway. Your mama's strong because she lets herself be scared and does what needs doing anyway. You understand? Thomas nodded slowly, tears finally spilling over. Daniel did something he'd never done before, pulled the boy into an awkward hug and let him cry. Inside the house, Caroline was discovering a truth about Daniel Cooper. He lived in comfort but without joy. His pantry was stocked, but he ate the same simple meals day after day. His house was sturdy but devoid of any personal touches, any warmth beyond fire heat. Anna followed Caroline everywhere, slowly emerging from her shell. One afternoon she asked, Mama, are we going to live here forever? I don't know, sweetheart. Mr. Cooper is helping us, but this is his home. I like it here. It's warm, and Mr. Cooper's nice, even though he doesn't smile much. Caroline had noticed that too. Daniel moved through life with grim efficiency, as if he'd forgotten how to take pleasure in anything. But she'd also noticed how he carved a small wooden horse for Anna, how he shortened his stride when Thomas walked beside him, how he checked on James every evening, even though the boy was recovering well. 2 weeks passed. The storm cycle broke, and Wyoming's winter settled into a cold but manageable pattern. James recovered fully, his laughter returning along with his health. The children adapted to ranch life with the resilience of youth, finding joy in simple things. Warm beds, full bellies, space to play. But Caroline knew this couldn't last. They were guests, charity cases. Daniel had been extraordinarily kind, but she couldn't impose forever. One evening after the children were asleep, she found him on the porch, staring at the starlit prairie. Mr. Cooper, Daniel, we're past formality, don't you think? Daniel, then. I need to talk about our situation. You've been incredibly generous, but we can't stay here indefinitely. Once the weather improves, I'll need to find work in town, find a place of our own. Why? The question stopped her. Because this is your home. We're intruding. This house has 8 bedrooms. You and your kids are using 3 of them. That leaves 5 sitting empty like they have for 15 years. Daniel's voice was rough. You cook better than I ever did. Thomas is learning ranch work faster than any hand I've hired. Anna makes more noise in one day than this house has heard in a decade. And James, he paused. That boy laughs, Mrs. Fletcher. Real laughs that echo through rooms that haven't heard joy since they were built. What are you saying? Daniel turned to face her fully. I'm saying stay, not as guests, as, he struggled with the words, as family. Caroline's breath caught. You don't mean that. I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. I'm not good with words, but I'm good with truth. He stepped closer. You need a home. Your kids need stability. I need, his voice cracked slightly. I need this house to feel like more than just walls and empty rooms. Daniel, you don't know us. We've been here 2 weeks. I know you fight for your children. I know you're proud but practical. I know you make this place feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. He looked away, uncomfortable with emotion. I'm 42 years old. I built a successful ranch, and I built it for nobody. What's the point of all this if there's no one to share it with? No one to pass it on to? Are you asking us to live here permanently? I'm asking you to let me help you build a life, you and those kids, not as my workers or my charity cases, as my family. Caroline felt something shift in her chest. This lonely cowboy was offering them everything she'd been desperately seeking: safety, stability, a home, but more than that, he was offering belonging. The children, she said carefully, they'd need to understand this isn't temporary. Then we tell them together. They gathered the children the next morning. Thomas, Anna, and James sat on the living room floor while Caroline and Daniel faced them from the couch. Kids, Caroline began. Mr. Cooper, Daniel has something to say. Daniel cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. I've been living alone a long time, built this ranch by myself, for myself. But having you here these past weeks, I realized something. A house ain't a home without people in it, without family. He looked at each child. Your mama and I talked. If you're willing, I'd like you to stay, not as visitors, permanent. This would be your home, and he paused, emotional. I'd be honored if you'd let me be part of your family. Thomas spoke first. Like our new pa. If you'd have me, I know I can't replace your real father, but I can promise to take care of you, teach you what I know, and never let you be cold or hungry again. Anna climbed into Daniel's lap without hesitation. I want to stay. I like it here. James, recovered and energetic, simply said, Can I have my own horse? Everyone laughed, even Daniel, a sound Caroline suspected was rare. Thomas remained serious. What about Mama? Are you going to marry her? The question hung in the air. Caroline felt her face flush. Thomas, that's not... Seems like the proper thing, Daniel said quietly. If Mrs. Fletcher would have me. Caroline's heart raced. Daniel, you don't need to... I'm not asking out of obligation. His gray eyes met hers with uncomfortable honesty. I'm asking because in 2 weeks you've made me feel more alive than I have in 15 years. Because I wake up looking forward to the day instead of just getting through it. Because those kids deserve a father, and I'd be proud to be that for them. And because... He took a breath. Because I'm tired of being alone. It wasn't a romantic proposal. It was practical, honest, and real. Caroline thought about poetry and passionate declarations, about the whirlwind courtship she'd had with Michael, about everything a proposal was supposed to be. Then she looked at her children, warm, safe, hopeful, and realized that sometimes love started not with passion but with partnership, not with romance, but with respect and genuine care. Yes, she said simply, yes, I'll marry you. Anna cheered. Thomas looked relieved. James asked again about the horse, and Daniel Cooper, the lonely cowboy who'd built an empire for no one, finally smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face and showed the man he'd been before loneliness had carved away his joy. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Dr. Patterson as witness. Caroline wore a dress she'd sewn from fabric Daniel had bought in town. The children stood with them, part of the vows, part of the promise. I, Daniel Cooper, take you, Caroline Fletcher, as my wife, and I take Thomas, Anna, and James as my children. I promise to provide for you, protect you, and build a life with you that honors all of us." Caroline's voice was steady and sure. "I, Caroline Fletcher, take you, Daniel Cooper, as my husband. I promise to make this house a home, to stand beside you, and to build a family together, one that includes the children I brought and any future we create together." When the simple ceremony ended, Daniel did something that surprised everyone. He knelt down to the children's level. "From this day forward, you're not just living in my house. This is your house. This ranch will be yours someday. And I'm not just someone helping your mama. I'm your father now, if you'll have me." Thomas extended his hand formally. "Thank you for saving us, sir, for giving us a home." Daniel shook the small hand solemnly, then pulled Thomas into a hug. "You're mine now, son. All of you are mine now." As winter released its grip on Wyoming and spring began to emerge, the Triple Creek Ranch transformed. Caroline planted a garden, Daniel taught Thomas to ride, Anna collected eggs from chickens they'd acquired, and James followed everyone around narrating their adventures in his 4-year-old voice. The house that had been a shell became a home. Laughter echoed through rooms that had known only silence. Meals became family gatherings instead of solitary necessities. And Daniel Cooper, who'd spent 15 years convincing himself he didn't need anyone, discovered what he'd been missing all along. One evening, 6 months after that desperate dawn when Caroline had whispered about her cold children, Daniel stood on his porch watching his family. Thomas was teaching Anna how to rope a fence post. James was helping Caroline hang laundry, mostly getting tangled in sheets. Their voices carried on the spring breeze, filling the air with life. Dr. Patterson rode up for a visit and stood beside Daniel. "You did good, Cooper, real good." Daniel nodded, his eyes never leaving his family. "She saved me as much as I saved them, maybe more. Town's talking about it, you know. The lonely cowboy who built a family from broken pieces." "Wasn't broken," Daniel said quietly. "We were just incomplete. Took finding each other to become whole." Caroline looked up from the laundry, met Daniel's eyes across the yard, and smiled. He smiled back, something that came easier now, more natural. That night, after the children were asleep, Caroline found Daniel in what had become their evening ritual, sitting together on the porch, watching the stars emerge over the prairie. "Happy?" she asked, settling beside him. Daniel took her hand, calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Didn't know I could be. Spent so long building walls, I forgot what it felt like to let someone in. The children love you, really love you, not just because you provide for them. They're good kids. You raised them right." "We're raising them right," Caroline corrected. "Together." Daniel pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, their home, their life. Inside, Thomas dreamed of becoming a rancher like his new father. Anna slept peacefully without nightmares for the first time in months. James breathed easily in sleep, his body fully healed, his spirit restored. And in the master bedroom, evidence of 2 lives joining. Caroline's sewing basket beside Daniel's worn boots, her dresses hanging next to his work shirts, 2 people learning to share space after years of solitude. The lonely cowboy had built them a home, and in doing so, he'd finally built himself one too. "My children are cold," Caroline had whispered at dawn on that desperate morning. Now, wrapped in her husband's arms, watching the stars wheel overhead, she whispered something different. "My children are home, and so am I." Daniel's response was simple and sure. "They're mine too. You all are, forever." And under the vast Wyoming sky, a family forged from desperation and loneliness became something stronger than either could have built alone. They became complete. The first test of their new family came in early summer. 6 months after the marriage, when a stranger rode up to the Triple Creek Ranch asking questions. His name was Howard Fletcher, and he was Michael's brother. Caroline was hanging washing when she saw the well-dressed man dismount near the barn where Daniel was working. Something about his posture, the way he carried himself, sent a chill through her, despite the warm June sun. She'd sent a telegram to Michael's family after they'd settled at the ranch, letting them know she and the children were safe and cared for. The response had been a terse acknowledgement, nothing more. The Fletchers had never approved of Michael's marriage to a seamstress's daughter, and after his death, they'd made no effort to help his widow and children. Until now. Caroline walked toward the barn, her heart pounding. She arrived just as Howard was introducing himself to Daniel. "I'm here about my brother's children," Howard said, his Boston accent sharp and clear. "I've come to take them home." Daniel's expression remained neutral, but Caroline saw his jaw tighten. "Home? Their home is here." Howard's gaze swept dismissively over the ranch. "This is a cattle operation in the middle of nowhere. Those children deserve proper education, proper society, proper opportunities. My family can provide that." "Your family," Caroline said, stepping forward, her voice cold, "didn't provide anything when we were starving in Philadelphia. Where were you when James was dying of pneumonia in a shed? Where were you when Anna was too cold to speak?" Howard had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We didn't know the situation was so dire. Your telegram made it sound like you'd found work, not that you'd—" He paused, looking between Caroline and Daniel. "Not that you'd remarried so quickly." "She married me 7 months after your brother died," Daniel said quietly. "After she'd tried everything else to keep those kids alive. After she'd been turned away by everyone in Cheyenne. I was there. Where were you? I'm here now, and I'm prepared to offer those children opportunities you cannot. Thomas could attend the best schools in Boston. Anna could be raised as a proper young lady. James would want for nothing." "They want for nothing now," Caroline said firmly. "They have a father who loves them, a home, stability. They have a stepfather who's a stranger, a ranch that could fail any season, and an isolated life miles from civilization." Howard's voice turned persuasive. "Caroline, be reasonable. I'm not trying to take them from you. You could come too. Our family would provide for all of you. You wouldn't have to live this hard frontier life anymore." For a moment, Caroline felt the pull of it, the security of city life, the promise of education and opportunity, the chance to reconnect with people who knew Michael. Then she looked at Daniel's face and saw not anger, but quiet pain, the fear that he might lose the family he'd just found. "No," she said clearly. "My children are exactly where they need to be." "Your children," Howard emphasized, "are Fletchers. They deserve their father's legacy." "Their father's legacy," Daniel interrupted, his voice harder now, "was working himself to death in a factory while his family back in Boston did nothing to help him. Don't come here talking about legacy when you ignored him while he was alive." Accusation hung in the air. Howard's face reddened. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Caroline's laugh was bitter. "Nothing about this has been fair, but I'll tell you what is true. Those children call Daniel Papa now. They thrive here, and I will not uproot them again just so your family can ease their guilty conscience." "I could fight you in court," Howard said quietly. "I have resources, lawyers. A judge might rule that children belong with blood family." Daniel stepped forward, his presence suddenly intimidating. "You could try, but you'd be fighting a woman who crossed a continent to save her children, and a man who'll spend everything he has to keep this family together. Ask yourself if your guilt is worth that battle." Howard studied them for a long moment. Then his shoulders sagged. "Michael would want them educated, Caroline. Promise me that. Whatever life they have here, promise they'll have opportunities to learn, to grow beyond this ranch." "I promise," Caroline said, "but on our terms, in our time, as our family." After Howard left, Caroline found Daniel in the barn, gripping a post with white knuckles. She touched his shoulder gently. He's right about one thing, Daniel said, not looking at her. I can't give them what a wealthy family could. Fine schools, culture, connections. Stop, Caroline said firmly. Those children don't need wealth. They need love, which you give freely. They need stability, which this ranch provides. And they need someone who sees them as people, not as obligations or legacies. That's you, Daniel. That's what you've given us. Daniel finally met her eyes. I was scared. When he talked about taking them, I realized how much I need them. Need all of you. If I lost you now... Caroline pulled him close. You won't lose us. We chose you. We keep choosing you. That evening they gathered the children to explain Howard's visit. Thomas, now 9, understood immediately. He wants us to go to Boston, Thomas said flatly, like we're something to collect. He thinks he's doing what's best for you, Caroline explained. He's family, and family cares. You and Papa Daniel are our family, Anna interrupted fiercely. That man is just someone who shares our name. James, sitting on Daniel's lap, looked up with serious 5-year-old eyes. Do we have to go? No, Daniel said firmly. Nobody's taking you anywhere. But your Uncle Howard raised a fair point. Education matters. So here's what we're going to do. He looked at Caroline, and she nodded, having discussed this earlier. We're going to bring a teacher here, not just for you 3, but for other ranch families too. We'll build a school. A school? Thomas's eyes widened. Here on the ranch? Why not? There's 6 other families within riding distance, all with kids. Been thinking about this anyway. Time to make it happen. Building the school became the family's summer project. Daniel and Thomas, now inseparable, worked on the construction. Caroline organized the curriculum and convinced a young teacher from Cheyenne, Miss Sarah Winters, to relocate to the ranch. Anna helped prepare the schoolroom, her natural leadership emerging. Even James contributed, carrying small tools and supervising with 5-year-old authority. The day the Triple Creek School opened, 12 children from neighboring ranches arrived, including the Morrison kids from the adjacent property and the Chen family's 3 daughters from 2 miles west. Miss Winters proved to be exactly what they needed. Young, energetic, and understanding that frontier education required flexibility. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and science, adapting lessons to ranch life. Geography was studied through maps of cattle trails. Mathematics involved calculating feed costs and land measurements. Science came alive through understanding animal husbandry and weather patterns. Thomas thrived academically, showing particular aptitude for numbers. Daniel began teaching him ranch management, and the boy absorbed everything like a sponge. By age 10, Thomas could calculate profit margins and anticipate market fluctuations. He's got a head for business, Daniel told Caroline one evening. Kid's going to run this ranch better than I ever could. He's got your teaching, Caroline replied. You've given him something Howard Fletcher never could. Practical wisdom and confidence. Anna discovered a talent for teaching others. At 7 years old, she helped younger students with reading, showing patience and creativity that amazed Miss Winters. That girl should be a teacher herself someday, Miss Winters told Caroline. She has a gift. James, energetic and charming, became the school's heart, organizing games, mediating disputes between students, making everyone laugh. Daniel called him their diplomat, but the greatest change came in Daniel himself. The lonely, taciturn cowboy gradually transformed into a man who smiled easily, who told stories at dinner, who played with his children in the evenings. Carolyn watched him wrestle with James, help Anna with her arithmetic, discuss ranch strategies with Thomas, and marveled at the metamorphosis. One night, lying beside him in bed, she said, "You know you're not the same man who rescued us from those church steps." "Better or worse?" he asked. "More, you're more, like you'd been living as a shadow of yourself, and now you're solid." Daniel pulled her closer. "That's what you did. Made me real again." 2 years passed in this rhythm. Seasons of work and growth, challenges met and overcome. The ranch prospered under Daniel's skilled management and Thomas's increasing contributions. The school became a community center, hosting gatherings and celebrations. The Cooper family became known throughout the territory as examples of frontier success. Then came the drought of 1894. Rain stopped falling in May and didn't return until October. Streams dried to trickles, grassland turned brown and brittle, cattle grew gaunt. Across Wyoming, ranchers watched their livelihoods wither. Daniel worked dawn to dusk, digging deeper wells, moving cattle to wherever sparse grass remained, rationing water with careful precision. Thomas, now 11, worked beside him without complaint, learning crisis management through brutal experience. Money grew tight. Daniel sold off cattle at bad prices rather than watch them die. Caroline stretched every dollar, made every meal count, kept the household running on increasingly slim resources. The children understood without being told that luxuries were gone. New clothes could wait. Treats were memories. Every expense was evaluated. One evening in September, with the drought still unbroken, Daniel sat at the kitchen table calculating their finances. His expression was grim. "How bad?" Carolyn asked quietly after the children were asleep. "Bad. We can make it through winter if we're careful, but if next year brings another drought, we'll lose the ranch." Caroline felt fear clench her stomach. This ranch was their security, their children's future. "What can we do?" "Pray for rain, work harder, hope." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I won't let this place fail, won't let you and the kids go back to having nothing." "We wouldn't have nothing," Caroline said firmly. "We'd have each other. That's not nothing." But privately she was terrified. She'd tasted stability, security, a home. The thought of losing it was unbearable. The answer came from an unexpected source. Thomas, who'd been listening from the hallway, appeared in the kitchen. "I have money saved," he said, "from helping Mr. Morrison with his barn last year and selling those rabbits. It's not much, but—" "No," Daniel said immediately. "That's your money, son. You earned it." "For what?" "I earned it here on this ranch with this family. If the ranch fails, my money doesn't matter anyway." Thomas's young face was set with determination. "Besides, Papa, you taught me that family takes care of family. Let me help." Daniel's eyes grew suspiciously bright. He pulled Thomas into a fierce hug. "You're a better man at 11 than I was at 20, but we're not taking your money. That's yours to keep." "Then let me work more. I can hire out to other ranches, bring in wages." You're staying in school," Caroline interrupted. "Education matters." "Education doesn't matter if we lose our home," Thomas shot back, then softened. "Mama, I can do both. School in the morning, work in the afternoon. I'm strong enough." They compromised. Thomas did hire out for some work, earning money that he insisted on contributing to the family fund despite Daniel's protests. Anna started a small business selling eggs and vegetables from their garden to neighbors. Even James, at 6, took on extra chores to free Daniel and Thomas for more critical work. The drought finally broke in October with a 3-day rain that turned the prairie green again. But the financial damage was done. The Coopers had survived, but barely. Winter brought new challenges. Caroline discovered she was pregnant with their first child together. The pregnancy was difficult. She was 34 now, and her body struggled. Dr. Patterson prescribed bed rest for the final months, which meant the children and Daniel had to manage the household along with ranch work. They rose to the challenge. Anna, at 9, took over cooking with surprising competence. Thomas managed both school and ranch duties with grim determination. James, though young, helped where he could. And Daniel moved through each day with quiet strength, caring for cattle, children, and his ailing wife without complaint. "I'm sorry," Caroline said one evening as Daniel brought her dinner in bed. "You didn't sign up for this." "I signed up for family," Daniel replied. "This is part of it. The hard parts, the scary parts. They count just as much as the easy ones." Their daughter was born on a February morning in 1895, a squalling, healthy baby girl they named Elizabeth. for Daniel's first love and his second chance. When Daniel placed the baby in Caroline's arms, Thomas, Anna, and James crowded around to meet their sister. "She's so small," James marveled. "You were that small once," Caroline reminded him. Anna touched the baby's tiny hand. "She's perfect." Thomas looked at Daniel seriously. "We'll help raise her right, Papa. Teach her about the ranch. Keep her safe." Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. "I know you will. You're the best big brother any kid could ask for." As spring arrived and Caroline regained her strength, the ranch began to recover from the drought year. Daniel and Thomas implemented new water conservation strategies. They diversified their operations, adding more chickens, starting a vegetable garden for sale, thinking beyond just cattle. The Triple Creek School continued to thrive, now with 18 students. Miss Winters had married a neighboring rancher, becoming Mrs. Sullivan, but continued teaching with even more investment in the community. One evening, 5 years after that desperate dawn in Cheyenne, Daniel stood on his porch watching his family. Thomas, now 12, was teaching James to rope. Anna was reading to baby Elizabeth in the garden. Caroline was hanging laundry, singing softly. Dr. Patterson, stopping by for a visit, joined him on the porch. "You've built something remarkable here, Daniel. Not just a ranch, a legacy." "They built it," Daniel said. "I just gave them a place to grow." "You gave them more than that. You gave them hope when they had none, home when they were desperate, and love when the world had shown them only rejection. That's not small." Daniel thought about the man he'd been. Bitter, isolated, convinced he was better off alone. Then he thought about who he'd become: husband, father, man with purpose beyond mere survival. "You know what the strangest part is?" Daniel said. "I spent 15 years thinking I was rescuing this ranch from loneliness by just enduring. Turns out I wasn't rescuing anything. I was just waiting." Waiting for what? For her to whisper that her children were cold. For me to finally do something brave instead of just something solitary. He smiled. For my real life to start. Carolyn looked up from the laundry and caught his eye. Even after 5 years, that look still made his heart skip. She was his partner, his compass, his reason for every hard day's work. Thomas successfully roped the fence post and whooped with joy. James cheered, Anna clapped, Elizabeth gurgled happily, and Daniel Cooper, who'd built an empire for no one, finally understood what he'd been building all along. Not walls, a foundation, not isolation, preparation, not emptiness, space for his future family to fill. "My children were cold," Caroline had whispered at dawn. Now they were warm, safe, loved, and thriving on 3,000 acres of Wyoming grassland with a father who'd do anything for them and a mother who'd already done everything. The lonely cowboy had built them a home, but in truth, they'd built it together. One day, one challenge, one moment of choosing each other at a time. And the house that had been empty for 15 years would never be empty again. It was filled with laughter, arguments, lessons, love, and the sound of children growing up secure in the knowledge that they were wanted, they were valued, they were home. "They're mine too," Daniel had said on their wedding day. 5 years later, standing on his porch, watching his family live and love and grow, he thought it again with even more certainty. "They're mine, all of them, forever, and I'm theirs. Finally, completely, joyfully, I'm theirs." The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 1899, 8 years after that desperate dawn in Cheyenne. Caroline was in the kitchen preserving strawberries, while Elizabeth, now 4, played with wooden blocks on the floor. Daniel came in from the barn holding the yellow paper, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Caroline asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Governor's office. They want us to testify before the territorial legislature about frontier family welfare and orphan placement." Daniel handed her the telegram. "Seems our stories traveled further than we thought." Caroline read the formal invitation with growing astonishment. Wyoming Territory was considering new legislation to support families taking in orphaned or abandoned children, and someone had recommended the Cooper family as a model case study. They want us to speak in front of politicians. Caroline's stomach fluttered with nerves. Daniel, I'm not educated. I don't know how to... You know how to survive, how to build a family from nothing. That's what they need to hear. He touched her shoulder gently. But it's your choice. I won't push you into anything that makes you uncomfortable. That evening they discussed it with the children. Thomas was now 15, tall and capable, already managing significant portions of ranch operations. Anna, at 13, had begun assisting Miss Sullivan at the school and showed remarkable teaching ability. James, 10 years old, was the ranch's unofficial ambassador, befriending everyone who visited. And Elizabeth, precocious and adored by her siblings, was already learning to read despite her young age. What would you tell them? Thomas asked. About us, I mean. Caroline considered carefully. The truth. That family isn't just about blood. That desperate people need opportunities, not judgment. That a home is built through choice and commitment, not just circumstance. Will you tell them about Uncle Howard? Anna asked quietly. The custody threat from years ago had left its mark, though Howard had never followed through on his legal warnings. If it's relevant, yes. We need to show that blood relation alone doesn't guarantee better outcomes for children. James, ever practical, asked, Can we all go? I want to see the Capitol building. Daniel smiled. I don't see why not. Make it a family trip. Thomas, you capable of minding the ranch with the hands for a week? Thomas straightened with pride. Yes, sir, I can handle it. Then it's settled, Caroline said. We'll tell our story. The journey to Cheyenne was bittersweet for Caroline. As their wagon rolled into town, she pointed out landmarks to her children, the train depot where they'd first arrived, the boarding houses that had turned them away, the general store behind which they'd sheltered in that desperate shed. That's where we lived? James asked, staring at the ramshackle structure in disbelief. Mama, that's not even a real building. It was all we had, Caroline said quietly. For 3 days, that shed was our whole world. Daniel guided the wagon down 3rd Street. There's Doc Patterson's office, where I brought him that first morning. Elizabeth, sitting on Anna's lap, asked with innocent curiosity, Were you really that cold, Mama? Colder than I ever want you to be, sweetheart. That's why this testimony matters. Other families are going through what we went through. Maybe we can help change that. They stayed at the boarding house that had originally turned them away. Mrs. Paulson, now elderly and with a different perspective, welcomed them warmly. Mrs. Cooper, I want to apologize, she said as she showed them to their rooms. I turned you away when you needed help most. I've regretted that decision for 8 years. Caroline was gracious. You made the choice you thought was right for your business. I understand that better now. Still, I was wrong. Your family... Mrs. Paulson gestured to the children helping carry luggage. Look what they've become. I could have been part of that story. Instead, I'm just the person who said no. The legislative hearing took place in the Territorial Capitol building, a grand structure that intimidated Caroline despite her resolve. She wore her best dress, dark blue with careful embroidery she'd done herself. Daniel was in his only suit, uncomfortable but dignified. The children sat in the gallery, scrubbed and neat, representing the results of their parents' choices. A panel of 5 legislators sat behind a raised desk, flanked by advisors and observers. The lead questioner was Senator Marcus Dawson, a stern man with wire-rimmed spectacles. Mrs. Cooper, Mr. Cooper, thank you for coming. We've heard remarkable things about your family. Please tell us, in your own words, how you came to build this unconventional household. Caroline took a breath and began. She told them about Philadelphia, about Michael's death, about bringing her children west with nothing but hope. She described those 3 days in Cheyenne, the cold, the hunger, the desperate fear that her children might die. I wasn't a bad mother, she said, her voice steady but emotional. I worked every job I could find. I tried everything I knew, but this territory wasn't built for widows with young children. and no connections, every door closed in my face. Daniel picked up the narrative, explaining his decision to help. I'd lived alone for 15 years, built a successful ranch, but couldn't figure out why it felt so empty. When I saw Mrs. Fletcher on those church steps, heard her whisper that her children were cold, I finally understood what I'd been missing. You married her within weeks, Senator Dawson observed, consulting his notes. Some might say that was hasty. Some might say watching children freeze while you debate propriety is worse, Daniel replied evenly. I offered marriage because it provided legal protection for the family and because it was the right thing to do. Everything else, the love, the partnership, the actual family that came from living together, working together, choosing each other every day. Senator Margaret Hartley, the only woman on the panel, leaned forward. Mrs. Cooper, you later had a biological child with Mr. Cooper. Did that change how you viewed your first 3 children? Caroline's response was immediate and fierce. Elizabeth is my daughter, and I love her completely, but so are Anna and Thomas and James. The fact that I gave birth to Elizabeth doesn't make her more mine than the children I fought to keep alive. If anything, carrying her made me understand even more deeply that motherhood isn't about biology. It's about the daily choice to love, protect, and nurture. Anna, watching from the gallery, wiped tears from her eyes. Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. The questions continued for over an hour. They asked about challenges, about the children's adjustment, about financial stability, about education. Caroline and Daniel answered honestly, holding nothing back. Finally, Senator Dawson asked the question that would define their testimony. What would you say to this legislature about families like yours? What policies would actually help? Caroline looked at her children in the gallery, then back at the senators. Stop making desperate people prove they're worthy of help before you give it. When I stood outside those boarding houses with sick children, I wasn't looking for charity, I was looking for a chance. One person gave me that chance, and look what happened. She gestured to her family. Thomas is 15 now, managing a successful ranch operation and teaching younger students mathematics. Anna is training to be a teacher herself. James is the kind of boy who makes everyone around him better. Elizabeth is growing up knowing she's loved and secure. None of that happens if everyone keeps saying no to desperate people. Daniel added, make it easier for established families to take in children who need homes. We've got the Triple Creek School serving 18 children now because we realized one family's solution can become a community's resource. Stop treating orphaned or abandoned children as problems to warehouse and start seeing them as opportunities for families who have room to grow. Even if those families are unconventional, Senator Hartley asked. Especially if they're unconventional, Caroline said firmly. The most conventional thing in the world is for comfortable people to turn away from desperate ones. What we need is the unconventional courage to actually help. The testimony concluded, and the Coopers were thanked for their time. As they left the chamber, they were approached by several people, other legislators, observers, even reporters from the Cheyenne newspaper. But the most important encounter came from a small woman in a worn dress who'd been sitting in the back of the gallery. She approached Caroline hesitantly, a young child clinging to her skirts. Mrs. Cooper, I'm Martha Reynolds. I'm a widow with 2 children, and I just arrived in Cheyenne last week. I heard about this hearing and came because, her voice broke, because I'm where you were 8 years ago. No money, nowhere to go, and I'm so scared. Caroline's heart clenched with recognition. This woman was her younger self, standing on that precipice of despair. She took Martha's hands. You're going to be all right. Do you need immediate help? Food, shelter? I found a place for tonight, but I don't know about tomorrow. Daniel was already pulling out his wallet. Here's enough for a week at the boarding house. Mrs. Paulson will take care of you, and here's the address of our ranch. You come there when you're ready, and we'll help you figure out next steps. Martha stared at the money in her hands, tears streaming. Why? You don't know me. Someone helped me when I needed it most, Caroline said. Now I help you. That's how this works. Over the following months, the Coopers learned their testimony had been more impactful than they'd imagined. The legislature passed the Frontier Family Support Act, making it easier for established families to take in orphaned children, providing small stipends to help with education and care, and creating a territorial network to connect children in need with families willing to help. The act wasn't named for the Coopers, but everyone knew their story had inspired it. More immediately, Martha Reynolds did come to the Triple Creek Ranch 3 weeks after that meeting in Cheyenne. She came with a proposal. She was an experienced cook and seamstress. If the Coopers needed help, she'd work in exchange for a safe place for her and her children to live while she figured out her next steps. "We don't need help," Daniel started to say, but Caroline cut him off. "Actually, we do. The school needs someone to prepare midday meals for students, and I've been wanting to expand my sewing work, but haven't had time. Martha, if you're willing, we have a small cottage near the main house. It's yours, rent-free, and we'll pay fair wages for your work." Martha's relief was palpable. "You're sure? You're really sure?" "We're sure," Caroline said, smiling. "Welcome to Triple Creek." Martha Reynolds and her 2 children, 7-year-old Peter and 9-year-old Lucy, became part of the extended ranch community. The children enrolled in the school and quickly bonded with the Cooper children. Martha's cooking for the school became legendary, and her sewing skills allowed Caroline to take on custom orders from families across the territory. 6 months later, Martha met and fell in love with Robert Chen, whose wife had died 2 years earlier, leaving him with 3 daughters. They married quietly, blending their families and settling on the Chen Ranch 2 miles away. "You did it again," Daniel told Caroline the night they heard about the engagement. "Changed someone's life just by showing up and helping." "We did it," Caroline corrected. "This is our legacy, Daniel. Not just our children, but this expanding circle of people choosing to help each other." The pattern repeated. Over the next 3 years, the Triple Creek Ranch became known as a place where desperate families could find temporary shelter and practical help. The Coopers never took in more than 1 family at a time, never for longer than 6 months, but always with genuine commitment to helping people stabilize. Some moved on to their own homesteads. Others, like Martha, became permanent parts of the community. A few didn't work out, and the Coopers learned difficult lessons about boundaries and realistic expectations. But the core principle remained. People who'd been helped had a responsibility to help others. By 1902, Thomas was 18 and officially partnering with Daniel in ranch management. He'd grown into a young man of remarkable competence and character, combining Daniel's practical wisdom with Caroline's compassionate heart. One evening, he approached his parents with a proposal. "Papa, Mama, I've been thinking, we've got 3,000 acres here. What if we set aside 200 acres for homesteading families? Small plots they could work while getting established, with access to our well water and equipment. Once they're stable, they could buy the land at cost or move to their own claims." Daniel studied his son with pride. "You've thought this through?" "Yes, sir. We could support maybe 4 families at a time, help them for 2 to 3 years each. It would be our way of doing permanently what we've been doing informally." Caroline's eyes shone with tears. "Thomas, that's beautiful." "I learned it from you," Thomas said simply. "Both of you. You taught me that success means nothing if you don't use it to lift others." The Cooper Family Homestead Program began that spring. The first family to participate was a young couple from Missouri, David and Ellen Wright, with infant twin daughters. They'd lost everything to flood and arrived in Wyoming with nothing but determination. Thomas took personal responsibility for mentoring David, teaching him everything Daniel had taught him. Anna organized a community supply drive, gathering donated tools and household goods. James befriended the Wright's dog and helped David build fences. Even 6-year-old Elizabeth contributed, sharing her toys with the twins. 2 years later, the Wrights purchased their homestead plot and established a successful farm. They were followed by 3 more families, each finding their footing with Cooper's support. The ripple effects spread across the territory. Other successful ranchers, inspired by the Cooper example, began similar programs. The territorial government started providing modest grants to established families willing to mentor newcomers. Wyoming Territory was slowly becoming known as a place where desperate people could find second chances. On Caroline's 41st birthday in 1903, 12 years after that desperate dawn in Cheyenne, Daniel organized a surprise celebration. The ranch was filled with people whose lives had been touched by their family. Martha and Robert Chen with their blended family, the Wrights and 3 other homestead families, Dr. Patterson, Miss Sullivan, and her husband, dozens of school children, neighboring ranchers, even Senator Hartley from the legislature. As Caroline stood on the porch looking at this gathered community, Daniel came up beside her. "Remember that morning?" he asked quietly, "when you whispered that your children were cold?" "Every day," Caroline admitted. "It was the worst moment of my life. I thought we were going to die. And now look." Daniel gestured at the celebration, at Thomas supervising food preparation, at Anna leading children in games, at James charming the guests, at Elizabeth showing off her reading skills. "Look what came from that moment." Carolyn leaned against her husband. "I whispered into the darkness and you answered. You were the answer I didn't know I was praying for." "We answered each other," Daniel corrected. "I was alone in a house full of everything except purpose. You gave me that. The kids gave me that. This," he gestured at their thriving ranch, "their extended community. This is what happens when broken people stop being broken alone and start being broken together." Senator Hartley approached them, wine glass in hand. "Mrs. Cooper, Mr. Cooper, I wanted you to know the Frontier Family Support Act has facilitated over 200 family placements across the territory. 200 children who might have ended up in institutions are instead growing up in homes. That's your legacy." "It's bigger than us," Caroline said. "It's what happens when one person decides to help instead of turning away. Then another person helps, then another. We just started it." "You did more than start it," Senator Hartley insisted. "You showed it was possible. That unconventional families could thrive. That desperate circumstances didn't define forever. That love mattered more than bloodlines or propriety or any of the conventional wisdom we cling to." As the celebration continued into evening, Caroline found herself sitting with Martha Chen, Ellen Wright, and 3 other women who'd found their way to stability with Cooper help. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked. "Taking us in, helping strangers who could have taken advantage?" Caroline thought about the challenges, the family that had stolen from them, the couple whose arguments had disrupted the household, the times she'd questioned whether they were doing more harm than good. "Never," she said firmly. "Even the hard situations taught us something. And look at what we built. You're all thriving. Your children are thriving. That's worth every difficult moment." Ellen Wright squeezed Caroline's hand. "You saved my family. We had nothing, we were nowhere, and you gave us a foundation to build from. My daughters will grow up knowing that when the world seemed cruel, strangers chose kindness. That changes how they'll see the world." That's the real legacy, Caroline realized aloud. Not just the families we help directly, but the families they help next, and the ones after that. Kindness multiplying across generations. As night fell and guests began departing, the Cooper family gathered on the porch, their traditional evening spot. Thomas sat on the railing, now eye level with Daniel. Anna leaned against the post, her journal in hand where she'd been recording the celebration. James sprawled on the steps, exhausted from entertaining. Elizabeth curled in Caroline's lap, fighting sleep. "Mama," Elizabeth asked drowsily, "when I grow up, can I help people like you do?" "Sweetheart, you already help people. Every kind word, every shared toy, every time you include someone who's lonely, that's helping. But I mean big helping, like how you helped James and Anna and Thomas." Thomas spoke up quietly. Elizabeth, here's the thing. Mama didn't set out to help people in some big, dramatic way. She was just trying to survive, to keep us alive. Papa wasn't planning to save anyone. He just saw people who needed help and made a choice. The big helping comes from lots of small choices. Anna added, that's what we're learning at the school too. You don't have to change the whole world. You just have to change one person's world. Then they change someone else's. That's how transformation happens. Daniel pulled Caroline close. These kids turned out all right, didn't they? They did, Caroline agreed. We did. As stars emerged over the Wyoming prairie, the Cooper family sat in comfortable silence, each thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate dawn to this moment of celebration, from whispered prayers in the darkness to a legacy of light spreading across the territory. My children are cold, Caroline had whispered into the void. Now, 12 years later, surrounded by family and community and rippling circles of hope, she whispered something different. My children are warm, they're safe, they're loved, and they're teaching the world that family is built through choice, that home is created through commitment, and that the coldest darkness can give way to the warmest light. Daniel's arm tightened around her. They're mine too, all of them, forever. And I'm yours, Caroline whispered back. Forever, Daniel confirmed. Above them, the Wyoming stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witnessing this family built from desperation and determination, witnessing the legacy spreading from one act of courage on a cold dawn, witnessing proof that the most broken moments can become the most beautiful beginnings. The lonely cowboy had built them a home, but together they'd built something even greater, a community of second chances, a legacy of choosing love over judgment, and a future where cold children would find warm hearths and desperate whispers would find answering courage. Always. The letter arrived in March of 1907, 16 years after Caroline had whispered those desperate words on a frozen dawn. Anna, now 17 and teaching full-time at the Triple Creek School, brought it to the breakfast table where the family was gathered. It's from the Boston Children's Aid Society, Anna said, studying the official letterhead, addressed to Mama and Papa both. Daniel looked up from his coffee, suddenly wary. Anything from Boston still carried echoes of Howard Fletcher's custody threat years ago. What do they want? Caroline opened the letter with steady hands, though her heart raced. She read silently, her expression shifting from caution to surprise to something like wonder. They want to hire us, she said finally. Well, hire Anna specifically. And they want our family to participate in a national conference on frontier family welfare. She looked up at her daughter. Anna, they're offering you a position training teachers across the West on how to work with children from difficult circumstances. Anna's hand flew to her mouth. What? But I'm only 17. You've been teaching for 4 years, Thomas pointed out. He was 21 now, officially co-owner of the ranch with Daniel, and had just announced his engagement to Sarah Morrison from the neighboring ranch. You've got more practical experience than most teachers, twice your age. James, now 14 and already showing signs of becoming as tall as Daniel, grinned at his sister. They probably heard about how you helped those Chen girls go from barely speaking English to top students in 2 years. You're famous, Anna. I'm not famous, Anna protested, but her eyes shone with possibility. Mama, what does the conference part mean? Caroline read further. They want our family to speak about how unconventional family structures can provide stability for children. It's in Chicago in June. They'd pay travel expenses and a speaking fee. 9-year-old Elizabeth, now reading far above her grade level and already showing Caroline's fierce protective instincts, asked, would we all go, even me? Especially you, Daniel said, pulling his youngest daughter close. You're proof that families built from love work just as well as families built from blood. Over the next weeks, the household buzzed with preparation. Anna, initially overwhelmed by the Boston offer, was encouraged by Miss Sullivan to accept. "You have a gift, Anna," her mentor said, "and gifts are meant to be shared beyond our small corner of Wyoming." The decision wasn't easy. Anna had never lived anywhere but the Triple Creek Ranch. The thought of traveling across the country, working with strangers, being away from family, it terrified her, but it also thrilled her. "What did you tell me years ago?" she asked Caroline one evening. "That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what matters despite the fear." "I did say that," Caroline admitted, "and I meant it. But Anna, you're under no obligation to take this position just because it's impressive. If teaching here brings you joy, that's enough. But what if I'm meant for more? What if this is like you coming west? Scary, but necessary." Anna's voice was thoughtful. "I've spent my whole life watching you and Papa help people. Maybe this is how I do the same thing, but bigger." Thomas, overhearing from the doorway, spoke up. "Whatever you decide, we support you. But Anna, you've been helping raise Elizabeth since she was born. You've taught dozens of kids, helped mentor the homestead families, assisted Mama with everything. You're ready for this." Anna did accept the position, contingent on completing her commitment to the school through the spring term. The Boston Children's Aid Society agreed and planned her start date for September. Meanwhile, preparation for the Chicago conference consumed the family's energy. Caroline worried about speaking to hundreds of people. Daniel, who still preferred cattle to crowds, had to be convinced that his story mattered. "I just did what any decent person would do," he insisted. "Why does that need a conference?" "Because most people don't do it," Caroline replied. "That's exactly why we need to speak, to show them it's possible." The journey to Chicago in early June was Elizabeth's first trip beyond Wyoming territory. She pressed her face to the train window, marveling at the changing landscape, mountains giving way to plains, plains to forests, then finally the sprawling urban density of Chicago. "There are so many people," she breathed, watching crowds at the station. "Do they all have homes?" "Not all of them," Caroline said quietly, seeing clusters of ragged children on street corners, women with hungry eyes, men slumped in doorways. "Some are like we were, desperate and looking for help that never comes." James, observant as always, noticed Caroline's expression. "Makes you want to help them all, doesn't it?" "Every single one," Caroline admitted. "But we can't save everyone. We can just share what we learned and hope others pick up the work." The National Conference on Child Welfare and Family Stability was held in a grand hotel that intimidated the Coopers with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. They stood in the lobby feeling distinctly out of place. A ranch family in their Sunday best, surrounded by scholars, philanthropists, and society women in elegant dresses. "Maybe this was a mistake," Daniel muttered. "These people don't want to hear from a cowboy. Mr. Cooper?" A woman approached them, middle-aged, with kind eyes and an efficient manner. "I'm Dr. Catherine Brennan, organizing chair. We're so honored you're here. Your family's story has been circulating in child welfare circles for years." She shook hands with each family member, then leaned closer to Caroline. "Mrs. Cooper, there are 200 people registered for this conference. Do you know why? Because they heard you'd be speaking. A woman who survived desperate poverty and built a thriving family against all odds. That's the voice people need to hear." The conference sessions were enlightening and frustrating in equal measure. The Coopers listened to academics discuss theories of child development, social workers debate policy approaches, and philanthropists propose elaborate institutional solutions. During a break, Thomas voiced what they were all thinking. "They're talking about children like they're problems to solve, not people to love." "That's exactly why we're here," Anna said, "to remind them that children aren't case studies. They're individuals who need families, not institutions." The Cooper family's speaking session was scheduled for the final day. Carolyn barely slept the night before, rehearsing in her mind what to say, how to make hundreds of strangers understand what they'd lived. Daniel found her on the hotel balcony at dawn, watching the city wake. "You're thinking about that morning," he said quietly. "Always," Caroline admitted. 16 years ago today, actually. March 7th, 1891. The morning I thought my children would die. The morning you saw us and made a different choice. We both made choices. You chose to keep fighting when anyone else would have given up. I chose to stop hiding in my comfortable isolation. Those choices saved all of us." When they took the stage that afternoon, facing rows of attentive faces, Caroline felt the same fear she'd felt outside those boarding houses in Cheyenne, the fear of being judged and found wanting. Then she looked at her family sitting in the front row, Thomas, confident and capable, Anna, poised and brilliant, James, supportive and strong, Elizabeth, curious and loved, and Daniel, her partner in every sense, who'd proven that family was built through daily choices to love. She began speaking, and the words flowed. 16 years ago, I stood in Cheyenne, Wyoming, with 3 starving children and nowhere to go. Every door in town had closed in my face. I was educated enough to read and write, skilled enough to sew and cook, desperate enough to work any job. But none of that mattered because I was a widow with children and no connections. She described those 3 days in the shed, the bone-deep cold, the terror of watching James's breathing grow labored, the moment she'd whispered into the darkness that her children were cold. One man heard me, not literally, he was across the street, but he heard me in the way that matters. He saw a desperate family, and instead of looking away like everyone else, he stepped forward. Mr. Cooper wasn't looking for a family. He was a lonely rancher who'd spent 15 years building a ranch with no one to share it with. But when he saw need, he responded. Daniel picked up the narrative, his rough voice carrying clearly. I didn't do anything heroic. I just offered what I had. Shelter, food, warmth, basic human necessities that should never be conditional. But here's what I learned. When you stop long enough to actually help someone, instead of just feeling sorry for them, you receive as much as you give. He gestured to the children. These 4 are my children. 3 came to me already made, and I had the honor of helping raise them. 1 was born from my marriage to their mother. I don't love any of them less because of how they came to me. I love them because they're mine, because we chose each other and keep choosing each other every day. Thomas stood and joined his parents on stage, unplanned but powerful. I'm the oldest. I remember Philadelphia, remember my birth father dying, remember the train west and those days in Cheyenne. I was 8 years old, and I thought my mama was the strongest person in the world for keeping us alive. His voice grew emotional. Then Daniel Cooper gave us a home, and I learned something important. Strength isn't just about surviving. It's about opening yourself up to love again after loss. My mama did that. Daniel did that. They taught me that family isn't who you're born to, it's who you choose to stand beside. Anna joined them next. I'm Anna. I was 6 when we came to the ranch. I barely remember Philadelphia. What I remember is being cold, then being warm, being hungry, then being fed, being scared, then being safe. Daniel became my papa not because of legal papers, but because he showed up every day, taught me things, believed in me, and made me feel valued. She addressed the audience directly. You're debating policies and institutions and theories, but children don't need theories. They need people willing to say, you're mine now, I've got you. That's what my parents did. That's what we need more of. James and Elizabeth stood together. James spoke for both of them. I was 4. I don't remember my birth father at all. Daniel's the only papa I've ever known, and Elizabeth was born into this family, but she's never treated different. We're all Coopers. We're all equal. That's what family means. Elizabeth added in her clear 9-year-old voice, my teacher in school says some families are real and some are made up. But that's wrong. Our family is real because we love each other. It doesn't matter how we started. It matters how we are. The audience was silent. Then Dr. Brennan stood and began applauding. Others joined until the entire room was on its feet. cheering for this frontier family who'd turned tragedy into triumph. During the question period, a stern-looking woman in the back raised her hand. "Mrs. Cooper, critics might say you simply traded your poverty for Mr. Cooper's resources, that it was a convenient arrangement rather than a real family." Caroline's response was immediate and fierce. "Convenient? Raising children is never convenient. Building trust after trauma isn't convenient. Learning to love again after loss isn't convenient. My husband and I worked every day to make this family strong. We chose each other in the hardest moments, not just the easy ones. If that's not real family, then I don't know what is." Another questioner asked, "Mr. Cooper, do you ever regret taking on 3 children who weren't biologically yours? The financial burden, the responsibility?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I regret waiting 42 years to start actually living. I regret the 15 years I wasted alone because I was too proud to need anyone. But taking in this family, that's the best decision I ever made. Those kids gave me more than I gave them. They gave me purpose." A younger woman, tears in her eyes, stood. "I'm a widow with 2 children. I'm here because I'm desperate. Where do people like me go when we have nothing?" Caroline stepped forward. "You find your Daniel Cooper. You keep looking until you find the person willing to help. And if you can't find that person, you become stronger so that someday you can be that person for someone else. The system fails desperate people every day, but individuals can choose differently. We need more individuals making different choices." The conference concluded with unexpected announcements. The organizers had been so moved by the Cooper testimony that they were establishing the Cooper Family Fellowship, a fund to support families taking in orphaned or abandoned children, providing financial assistance and training based on the Cooper model. "We can't replicate your family," Dr. Brennan explained at the closing dinner. "Every family is unique, but we can replicate the principles, choosing love over convenience, seeing children as individuals, building family through daily commitment rather than biological connection. You've given us a template." The train ride back to Wyoming was jubilant. Anna was energized about her upcoming position. Thomas couldn't wait to tell Sarah about Chicago. James was already planning improvements to the homestead program based on ideas from the conference. Elizabeth was simply happy to be going home. Caroline and Daniel stood in the observation car, watching the landscape roll past as they left Illinois behind. 16 years, Caroline said softly, from that desperate morning to this moment. Sometimes I can't believe we've come this far. You always had the strength, Daniel replied. You just needed someone to recognize it. We needed each other. I was broken. You were lonely. Together, we became whole. When they arrived back at the Triple Creek Ranch, they found the community had organized a welcome home celebration. Martha Chen had coordinated a feast. The Morrison family brought news that Sarah and Thomas's wedding venue was secured. Dr. Patterson announced he was retiring and his replacement, a young doctor trained in the latest child health practices, had specifically requested to work near the Cooper family. Your reputation precedes you, Patterson said with a smile. Told him this was the best community in Wyoming, largely because you folks set the standard for helping each other. That evening, in their traditional spot on the porch, the Cooper family gathered. Thomas talked about his wedding plans and taking on more ranch management. Anna was nervous and excited about Boston. James was planning to expand the school's agriculture program. Elizabeth wanted to start a library for younger children. You've built something bigger than yourselves, a voice called from the yard. They looked up to see a wagon approaching, a woman driving with 3 children visible in the back. The woman pulled up and climbed down wearily. She was thin, exhausted, carrying an infant, while 2 other children clung to her skirts. Are you the Coopers? I heard in town that you help families. My name is Grace Patterson. My husband died 6 months ago. I've been trying to make it alone, but... Her voice broke. My children are so cold. Even in summer, they're cold because we have nothing. No food, no real shelter. I don't know where else to go. Caroline and Daniel looked at each other, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. Then Caroline stepped forward, taking the woman's hand. "You're in the right place. Come inside. Let's get your children fed and warm. We'll figure out the rest together." As Grace and her children were ushered into the house, Caroline paused on the porch. Daniel came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. "It never ends, does it?" he said quietly. "There's always another desperate family, another person who needs help." "No," Caroline agreed, "but now we're not alone in helping them. Look." Martha Chen was already organizing food. Thomas was settling the children at the table. Anna was finding clean clothes. James was entertaining the kids with silly faces. Elizabeth was sharing her dolls. The circle had expanded far beyond one lonely cowboy and one desperate widow. It had become a community, a movement, a legacy of choosing love over convenience, help over judgment, connection over isolation. "My children are cold," Grace Patterson had said, echoing Caroline's words from 16 years ago. But this time the answer came not from one person, but from an entire family who understood what those words meant, who remembered their own cold, desperate morning, and who chose every day to make sure no family faced that darkness alone. Daniel pulled Caroline close, watching their children care for this new family with the same love and commitment they'd received. "You know what the best part is," Daniel said softly. "We're teaching them. Thomas will help another family. Anna will train teachers who will help thousands. James will expand this work. Elizabeth will grow up knowing that helping others isn't extraordinary. It's just what families do." Caroline rested her head on his shoulder. "The loneliest cowboy in Wyoming built a home. The strongest woman I ever met filled it with love. Our children learned to share it, and now it belongs to everyone who needs it." Inside, laughter erupted, children playing together despite having just met. Grace Patterson's shoulders relaxed as Martha brought her tea. The infant stopped crying, soothed by Anna's gentle rocking. Another desperate dawn had become another new beginning. The circle wasn't just complete, it was infinite, rippling outward through generations, through communities, through every person who chose to hear the desperate whisper, "My children are cold," and answered with warmth, with home, with the transformative power of saying, "They're mine too." Always and forever, they're mine too. The stars emerged over Wyoming, witnessing this family built from broken pieces, witnessing the legacy that started with one cowboy's courage to step forward and one widow's refusal to give up, witnessing the eternal truth that the coldest darkness always, always contains the possibility of the warmest light, if only someone is brave enough to kindle it. The telegram came on a bitterly cold January morning in 1912, 21 years after that desperate dawn in Cheyenne. Thomas, now 26 and married with his first child on the way, brought it to the main house where Caroline and Daniel were having breakfast. His face was pale. "It's from Boston. Howard Fletcher is dying. He's asking for you, Mama, for all of us." Caroline's hand stilled on her coffee cup. Howard, Michael's brother who'd threatened to take her children 15 years ago, who'd represented everything she'd feared about losing her family. "Why would he want to see us?" Thomas handed her the telegram. The words were simple. "Howard Fletcher gravely ill. Requests presence of Caroline Cooper and her children. Matter of urgent importance. Please come. Fletcher family attorney." Daniel read over her shoulder. "You don't have to go. After what he put us through." "He didn't take them," Caroline said quietly. "He could have fought us in court, and he walked away. Maybe he deserves the chance to say whatever he needs to say." Anna, now 22 and recently returned from Boston after 4 successful years training teachers, spoke from the doorway. "I'll go with you, Mama. I know Boston now, and maybe—" She paused. "Maybe he needs to see what became of us. See that his choice not to fight was the right one." The journey to Boston was somber. Caroline, Daniel, Thomas, and Anna made the trip, leaving James, now 19 and managing the ranch, in charge with Elizabeth, now 14, and remarkably capable. "Tell him we turned out okay," James had said before they left. "Tell him we're grateful he let us be." Boston in January was harsh, reminding Caroline painfully of those desperate days in Philadelphia and Cheyenne. The Fletcher mansion stood in Beacon Hill, an imposing brownstone that spoke of old money and established society, everything Michael had left behind to marry her. They were received by Howard's wife, Margaret, a refined woman whose eyes held sadness and something like shame. "Thank you for coming. Howard's been asking for you for weeks. The doctors say he has days, perhaps only hours." She led them to a second-floor bedroom where Howard Fletcher lay propped against pillows, his once robust frame wasted by illness. His eyes, though, were alert and fixed on Caroline with desperate intensity. "You came," he whispered. "I wasn't sure you would." Caroline approached the bed, Daniel close behind her. "You asked, and despite everything, your family." Howard's laugh was bitter and weak. "I treated you terribly, judged you, threatened you, acted like I had some moral authority over my brother's children, when the truth is—" He coughed, struggling. "The truth is I failed Michael when he was alive, and I tried to ease my guilt by taking his children from the woman who actually saved them." Thomas stepped forward. "Mr. Fletcher, I'm Thomas. I was 9 when you came to the ranch." Howard's eyes filled with tears. "You were so young, so fierce in defending your family. I saw my brother in you, the stubbornness, the loyalty. It terrified me because I knew if I pushed that custody battle, I'd break something precious, something Michael would never forgive me for." "Why did you really come?" Anna asked gently. "Back then, why did you want us?" "Guilt," Howard admitted. "Pure guilt. Michael asked me for help when he lost his job in Philadelphia, asked me to loan him money to get through rough times. I refused because I was angry he'd married beneath his station, angry he'd thrown away his family legacy. 6 months later, he was dead. I couldn't live with that, so I convinced myself I was doing the noble thing by trying to rescue his children." He looked at Caroline. "But you didn't need rescuing. You'd already saved them. You'd found a man who loved them, a place where they thrived. I saw that in 20 minutes at your ranch. Everything I told myself about them needing Boston society was just my ego trying to rewrite my failures." Margaret Fletcher spoke up. "Howard's been following your family's story for years. The legislature testimony, the school you built, the conference in Chicago, the families you've helped. He has newspaper clippings, letters from colleagues who've met you. He's watched from a distance as Michael's children became remarkable adults." Howard reached a shaking hand toward Thomas. Tell me who you became." Thomas took his uncle's hand. "I own half of the Triple Creek Ranch with my father, with Daniel. My wife Sarah and I are expecting our first child in March. I serve on the Territorial Council for Agricultural Development. I mentor young ranchers through the Homestead Program, and I've never once regretted the life I had instead of the one you might have given me." Anna added, "I trained 127 teachers across 5 states in the last 4 years. I've written curriculum for frontier education that's being used in dozens of schools. Next month, I'm starting as director of the Western Education Initiative, and none of that would have happened if I'd grown up in Boston society." "Michael would be so proud," Howard whispered. "I wanted to tell you that. I wanted you to know that your father, your birth father, would be bursting with pride at who you've become." "He'd be proud of Mama," Thomas said firmly. "She's the one who kept us alive, who made the hard choices, who found us a father when we needed one. Michael's legacy lives through her strength, not through Fletcher family connections." Howard turned back to Caroline. "I need to apologize, and I need to ask something, though I have no right." "What is it?" Caroline asked. "My son, Margaret's, and my boy, Charles. He's 17 and heading to Harvard next year, but he's spoiled, entitled, sees everything as his due because of the Fletcher name." Howard's voice cracked. "I'm dying knowing I've failed him the way I failed Michael. He needs to understand what real strength looks like, what genuine success means. Would you, he struggled to breathe, would you let him visit your ranch, spend a summer learning what actual work and real values look like? The request was stunning. Daniel's hand found Caroline's, and she felt the silent question, after everything, could they really help this family? Please, Margaret added. Charles is a good boy underneath the privilege, but he needs to see how other people live, needs to understand that the Fletcher name means nothing without character to back it up. Your family could teach him that. Caroline looked at Thomas and Anna. This would be their burden too, mentoring a privileged teenager who might resent everything they represented. Thomas nodded slowly. We could use the help on the ranch. If he's willing to work, really work, we'll teach him. Anna smiled slightly. And if he's not willing at first, we'll teach him anyway. That's what family does. Howard's relief was palpable. Thank you, God, thank you. I don't deserve this kindness after how I treated you. Everyone deserves second chances, Caroline said, thinking of her own desperate morning, of Daniel's choice to help a stranger, of all the families they'd assisted over the years. We'll take care of Charles. We'll teach him the values Michael would have wanted him to learn. Howard died that night with Margaret at his side, and the knowledge that his son might still learn what his father had failed to teach him. The funeral 2 days later was a stark affair, wealthy Bostonians in black, speaking in hushed tones about legacy and loss. Charles Fletcher stood by his mother, 17, and trying to look stoic, but Caroline saw the confused grief of a boy losing his father while still figuring out who he was. After the service, Charles approached them cautiously. He was tall, well-dressed, with his father's features and an uncertainty that reminded Caroline of Thomas at that age, trying to be brave while falling apart inside. My father said you'd teach me, Charles said awkwardly, about ranching and other things. Do you really want me to come? Want is a complicated word, Daniel said gruffly, but we'll honor your father's request. You come to Wyoming in May, you work through September, we'll treat you like any ranch hand. No special privileges, no allowances for your background. You work, you learn, you eat. That's the deal. I don't know anything about ranching, Charles admitted. Nobody does until they learn, Thomas said. I was 8 when I started. You're 17 with stronger muscles. You'll be fine if you're willing. Charles arrived at the Triple Creek Ranch on a warm May afternoon, stepping off the train in Cheyenne with 3 expensive leather suitcases and clothes completely unsuitable for ranch work. James, who'd volunteered to collect him, took one look and laughed. Well, we've got our work cut out for us. Come on, city boy, let's get you home. The first week was brutal for Charles. He'd never done manual labor, never worked with animals, never experienced the relentless physical demands of ranch life. He was sore, sunburned, frustrated, and humiliated by how much even 14-year-old Elizabeth knew that he didn't. I don't understand why I'm here, he said one evening, slumped at the dinner table after a particularly hard day. My father sent me to learn, but learn what? How to shovel manure, how to repair fences. I'm supposed to go to Harvard, become a lawyer or banker. What does any of this matter? Caroline set down her serving spoon. Your father sent you here to learn the one thing Fletcher money couldn't buy: character. He watched Michael's children grow up strong and capable, and he wanted that for you. But you're not related to us, Charles protested. Why would you care about teaching me anything? Because your father asked us to, Daniel said simply, and because every young person deserves to understand that privilege is responsibility, not entitlement. You've been given advantages. Question is, what are you going to do with them? The turning point came 3 weeks into Charles's stay. The Morrison Ranch, whose family had been neighbors and friends for years, suffered a devastating barn fire. The structure was gone, livestock was scattered, and the family faced potential ruin. Without being asked, the entire Cooper household mobilized. Thomas organized work crews. Anna coordinated meal preparation for the workers. James rounded up scattered cattle. Even Elizabeth helped care for the Morrison children. Charles watched from the sidelines, uncomfortable and uncertain. Daniel found him standing near the water pump. "You waiting for an invitation?" Daniel asked. "I don't know what to do. I don't have any useful skills. So learn, grab tools, ask questions, work until you can't work anymore. That's what neighbors do." Charles joined the effort hesitantly, but something shifted as the day progressed. He saw Thomas, a successful rancher, working shoulder to shoulder with hired hands. He saw Anna, an educated professional, cooking for 50 workers without complaint. He saw James showing younger kids how to calm frightened animals. He saw Elizabeth organizing supply distribution with mature efficiency. By nightfall, with the Morrisons' temporary shelter erected and their immediate needs met, Charles was exhausted in a way he'd never experienced. But he was also exhilarated. "We actually helped them," he said to James as they drove the wagon home. "They were in trouble and we made it better." "That's what community means," James replied. "You help because they need it, because someday you'll need help too, because we're all in this together." Over the following months, Charles transformed. The soft, entitled boy from Boston disappeared, replaced by a young man learning the satisfaction of hard work, the dignity of service, the joy of genuine connection. He learned to ride, to rope, to repair equipment. More importantly, he learned to listen to people whose education came from experience rather than books, to value character over credentials, to see wealth as responsibility rather than privilege. One evening in late August, with his departure for Harvard looming, Charles joined Caroline on the porch, the family's traditional gathering spot. "My father was right," Charles said quietly. "I needed this. Needed to understand what real people, real families look like." "Real people?" Caroline smiled. "Charles, everyone's real. You just needed to see beyond your own circumstances. I mean people who've struggled, who've built things through work instead of inheritance, who measure success by different standards." He turned to face her. "Mrs. Cooper, can I ask you something? How did you do it? How did you keep going when everything was falling apart?" Caroline thought about that desperate morning 21 years ago, about whispering into the darkness that her children were cold, about the terror and determination that had driven her. "I didn't have a choice to stop," she said finally. "My children needed me to keep trying, so I did. One step, one door, one desperate attempt after another until finally someone answered. My father felt guilty his whole life for not being that someone for Uncle Michael, for not helping when it mattered." Charles' voice was thick with emotion. "He sent me here because he wanted me to be the kind of man who helps, not the kind who makes excuses." "Then be that man," Caroline said. "You've got opportunities most people never get. Use them to lift others up, not to set yourself apart." Charles left for Harvard in September, but he returned every summer for the next 4 years. He brought classmates with him, young men from wealthy families who needed the same lessons he'd learned. The Triple Creek Ranch became a training ground for a new generation of privileged youth, learning that wealth meant responsibility and that true success was measured in lives improved, not just money accumulated. The winter of 1915 brought another telegram, this one from Charles, now 21 and graduating from Harvard. "Coming home to Triple Creek for Christmas, bringing someone special. Need your blessing." He arrived with Emily Patterson, Dr. Patterson's granddaughter who'd been studying nursing in Boston. They'd met at a charity event Charles had organized for Frontier Medical Services, fallen in love over shared values about service and community, and wanted to marry at the Triple Creek Ranch. "You called it home," Caroline said, hugging Charles at the train station. "The ranch." "It is home," Charles said simply, "more than the Boston house ever was. This is where I learned who I wanted to be." The wedding was held on a brilliant December afternoon, the ranch house and barn decorated with evergreen boughs and candles. Thomas stood as Charles's best man. Anna organized the celebration. James handled logistics with his usual charm. Elizabeth, now 18 and planning her own teaching career, supervised the younger children from the Homestead families. Margaret Fletcher came from Boston, tears streaming as she watched her son marry a frontier doctor's granddaughter in a Wyoming ranch house, a scene that would have horrified Boston society, but which represented everything Howard had wanted for his son. "You saved him," Margaret told Caroline after the ceremony. "Just like you saved your own children. You took a spoiled boy and taught him how to be a man." "We just gave him space to grow," Caroline replied. "Same as Daniel did for us all those years ago." That evening, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, the extended Cooper family gathered one last time on the porch. Thomas and Sarah with their 3 children, Anna and her fiancé, a fellow educator she'd met in Denver, James courting the Morrison daughter, Elizabeth planning to attend teachers' college, Charles and Emily starting their life together with plans to open a medical practice serving frontier communities, and Daniel and Caroline, now 64 and 54 respectively, watching the legacy they'd built ripple outward through generations. 24 years, Daniel said, pulling Caroline close. "Since that morning I saw you on the church steps." 24 years of choosing each other, Caroline agreed. Of choosing love over fear, help over judgment, connection over isolation. Thomas raised a glass. "To Mama and Papa, who taught us that family is built through daily choices to love." Anna added, "Who showed us that the coldest darkness can become the warmest light." James continued, "Who proved that helping one person can change hundreds of lives." Elizabeth finished, "Who made this ranch a home for everyone who needed one." Charles stood, his voice emotional. "To the family who took in a stranger because a dying man asked them to, who taught me that privilege without purpose is emptiness, who gave me a foundation to build a meaningful life. You didn't have to help me, but you did, and that made all the difference." As stars emerged over Wyoming, Caroline thought about the journey that had brought them here. From desperate widow to matriarch of a family that extended far beyond bloodlines. From frozen mourning to this moment of warmth and celebration. From whispered prayer to answered blessing. "My children are cold," she'd whispered 24 years ago. Now, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and the ever-expanding circle of lives touched by one act of courage on a desperate dawn, she whispered something different. "My children are home, they're warm, they're loved, and they're teaching the world that family is built through choosing each other, that home is created through commitment, and that the coldest darkness always gives way to light if someone is brave enough to kindle it." Daniel's arms tightened around her. "They're mine too. They always will be." "Forever," Caroline agreed. And under the vast Wyoming sky, the legacy continued, not just in the children they'd raised, but in the principle they'd lived. That desperate whispers in the darkness deserve answering courage, that broken people can build beautiful things together, and that the simple choice to help changes everything. The lonely cowboy had built them a home. The desperate widow had filled it with love. Their children had expanded it into a movement. And the story that began with cold children on a frozen dawn had become a testament to the transformative power of choosing love, choosing help, choosing family, every single day, in every generation, forever. The circle wasn't just complete, it was eternal. The letter arrived at the Triple Creek Ranch on a spring morning in 1925, 34 years after Caroline had whispered those desperate words into the frozen Cheyenne dawn. Elizabeth, now 28 and a celebrated educator running 3 frontier schools, opened it while visiting her parents for the weekend. "Mama, Papa," she called, her voice trembling with emotion. "You need to see this." Caroline, now 63, and Daniel, 73, and moving slower but still sharp as ever, came to the kitchen table where Elizabeth sat staring at official letterhead from the Wyoming State Historical Society. "They want to designate the Triple Creek Ranch as a historical landmark," Elizabeth read aloud. "They're calling it the birthplace of the modern Western family support movement. They want to interview you both, document the full story, preserve it for future generations. Daniel grunted, uncomfortable with the attention, as always. We just lived our lives. Don't see why that needs preserving. Because hundreds of families exist. Because of what you started here, Elizabeth said firmly. Because the Cooper Family Fellowship has placed over 1,000 children in loving homes. Because 4 states now have legislation modeled on Wyoming's family support laws. Because your story matters, Papa. Caroline took Daniel's weathered hand in hers. Maybe it's time, Daniel. We're not getting younger. Someone should know how it really happened. Not the legend, but the truth. The Historical Society sent a young historian named Margaret Walsh, no relation to the Mrs. Walsh who'd helped Caroline and Helena all those years ago, to conduct the interviews. She arrived with notebooks, a camera, and an eagerness that reminded Caroline of Anna at that age. Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, thank you for agreeing to this, Margaret said, setting up her equipment in the ranch house living room. Your story has been told in fragments for years. I want to capture it completely before... She paused tactfully. Before we die, Daniel said bluntly. Fair enough. Where do you want to start? At the beginning, Mrs. Cooper, tell me about that morning in Cheyenne. Caroline closed her eyes, and suddenly she was there again, 26 years old, desperate, terrified, whispering into the darkness that her children were cold. She told it all, Philadelphia, the train west, the boarding houses, the shed, the church steps. The moment Daniel had crossed the street and changed everything. I thought we were going to die, Caroline said quietly. I'd fought so hard, tried everything I could think of, and I'd run out of options. When I whispered that my children were cold, I wasn't talking to anyone specific. I was just releasing the truth into the universe, admitting defeat. But someone heard you, Margaret prompted. Someone saw us, Daniel corrected. I couldn't hear her from across the street, but I saw a woman at the end of her rope with 3 kids who needed help. And I'd spent 15 years being comfortable and lonely, building an empire for nobody. Something inside me said, enough. Time to stop hiding and start living. Margaret's questions continued for hours. She wanted details about the marriage, about the children's adjustment, about building the school, surviving the drought, Caroline's difficult pregnancy, the custody threat from Howard Fletcher, the legislative testimony, the homestead program, Charles Fletcher's transformation. It's not just a family story, Margaret explained. It's a case study in how individual courage can transform entire systems. Your testimony in 1899 changed territorial law. The Cooper Family Fellowship has operated for 23 years now. Schools across 5 states use your model for integrating children from difficult circumstances. You started a movement. We started a family, Caroline corrected gently. The movement happened because we shared what worked for us and other people adapted it to their situations. But it was never about creating systems. It was about loving children who needed love. Over the following days, Margaret interviewed the extended family. Thomas, now 35 and running the ranch with his 4 children learning alongside him, spoke about growing up with Daniel's teaching and Caroline's unwavering support. Anna, 33 and director of the Western Education Collaborative, described how her unconventional childhood had shaped her educational philosophy. James, 29 and serving in the state legislature, explained how watching his parents help dozens of families had inspired his public service career. Elizabeth, the youngest biological Cooper child, had perhaps the most unique perspective. I'm the only one who was born into this family rather than chosen into it, and I've never felt more or less loved than my siblings. That taught me the most important lesson of my life. Love is a verb, not a feeling. It's what you do every day, not just what you feel in your heart. Margaret also tracked down families who'd been helped over the years. Martha Chen, now running a successful catering business with her blended family. The Wright family, whose homestead had become one of the most productive farms in the region. Grace Patterson, whose desperate arrival in 1907 had so perfectly mirrored Caroline's own story, now managing the Triple Creek School cafeteria and raising her 3 thriving children. Most surprisingly, Margaret found a 68-year-old woman in Denver named Eleanor Price, the same woman who'd gossiped about Caroline and Helena decades ago, then later sought her help for a widowed sister. "I was cruel," Eleanor admitted to Margaret. "I judged Mrs. Fletcher, Mrs. Cooper, for being barren, for being desperate, for accepting an unconventional marriage. Then I watched her build something beautiful from those ashes. She helped my sister when I couldn't. She taught me that worth isn't about fitting society's expectations. It's about who you choose to be when circumstances are hardest." As summer progressed, the historical designation plans expanded. The state wanted to hold a dedication ceremony at the ranch, inviting all the families who'd been helped, all the organizations that had grown from the Cooper model, all the people whose lives had been touched by one cowboy's decision to step forward on a frozen morning. Caroline was overwhelmed by the scale. "It's too much. We're just ordinary people." "You were ordinary people who did extraordinary things," Anna corrected, visiting specifically for this conversation. "Mama, you're 63. Papa's 73. How many more chances will we have to gather everyone and celebrate what you built? Let them honor you." The dedication ceremony was scheduled for September 7th, 1925, 34 years and 6 months after that desperate dawn. As the date approached, responses poured in. Over 300 people planned to attend, more than the ranch could possibly accommodate. The celebration expanded to the open meadow north of the main house, with tents erected for shelter and tables borrowed from every family within 50 miles. Daniel watched the preparations with bemused resignation. "This is ridiculous, all this fuss over doing what anyone should have done." "But most people didn't do it," Caroline said, watching workers set up the stage where they'd be asked to speak. "That's why it matters. You showed people it was possible." The morning of September 7th dawned clear and perfect, the kind of crystalline Wyoming day that made everything feel possible. Families began arriving at dawn, some traveling from Montana, Colorado, even as far as Idaho and Nebraska. They came in wagons, in automobiles, on horseback, carrying children and memories and gratitude. Caroline stood on the porch watching them gather, feeling the weight of decades settle over her shoulders. So many lives, so many stories, all connected by one moment of desperate prayer and answering courage. Dr. Patterson, now in his 80s and barely mobile, arrived with his family. "Caroline, Daniel, I've practiced medicine for 50 years. I've saved lives, delivered babies, healed the sick. But nothing I did had the ripple effect of bringing you two together that day, watching what you built. That's the finest legacy any person could ask for." The ceremony began at noon. Margaret Walsh, the historian, served as master of ceremonies, having immersed herself so deeply in the Cooper story that she could tell it with the passion of family. She started by reading from Caroline's original testimony to the territorial legislature in 1899. "Stop making desperate people prove they're worthy of help before you give it. When I stood outside those boarding houses with sick children, I wasn't looking for charity. I was looking for a chance." That testimony changed Wyoming law, Margaret told the assembled crowd, but more importantly, it changed how we think about family, about worthiness, about who deserves help and on what terms. The Coopers demonstrated that unconventional families could thrive, that children needed love more than pedigree, that desperate circumstances didn't define forever. She called forward representatives from the Cooper Family Fellowship, which had facilitated family placements for over 1,000 children. The director, a woman named Susan Martinez, who'd herself been placed through the program as a child, spoke with tears streaming. "I was 8 years old, orphaned, angry, and convinced nobody would want me. The Cooper model said I was worthy of family anyway. The family who took me in used the principles the Coopers established: patience, commitment, seeing me as a person rather than a problem. I grew up, became a teacher, eventually took over directing this organization. Everything good in my life traces back to the belief that children like me deserved love. That belief started here, on this ranch, with this family. Legislators spoke about policy changes inspired by Cooper advocacy. Educators discussed curriculum based on Anna's frontier teaching methods. Ranchers described economic models adapted from Thomas's innovations. Medical professionals credited Charles Fletcher's frontier practice, still operating 20 years later, with bringing modern healthcare to remote communities. Then Margaret called Caroline and Daniel to the stage. The crowd rose as one, 300 people standing in respect for the elderly couple who'd started everything. Caroline felt Daniel's hand tremble slightly in hers. Whether from age or emotion, she couldn't tell. "We're simple people," Daniel began, his voice still strong despite his years. 34 years ago, I was a lonely man hiding on a ranch, pretending I didn't need anyone. Caroline was a desperate woman with 3 children and nowhere to go. We were both broken in different ways. Caroline picked up the narrative. I'd been rejected 12 times by men who said I wasn't worthy because I couldn't have children. Daniel had been rejected by one woman and spent 15 years punishing himself for it. We were both convinced our circumstances defined us. Then we found each other. And we learned something important, Daniel continued. Broken people don't need fixing. They need accepting. Caroline didn't need me to fix her situation. She needed me to see her worth despite her circumstances. I didn't need her to heal my loneliness through some fairy tale romance. I needed her to show me that building a life with others was better than hiding alone. Caroline looked out at the crowd, at Thomas and his children, at Anna and her students, at James and his colleagues, at Elizabeth and her teachers, at Charles Fletcher and Emily with their medical practice, at Martha Chen and Grace Patterson and the Wright family, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by this legacy. When I whispered that my children were cold, I was at the absolute bottom. No hope, no options, no future I could see. But darkness and desperation weren't the end of my story. They were the beginning, because sometimes the worst moments are preparation for the best ones. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. She took Daniel's hand. This man heard me. He stepped forward when everyone else had turned away. And together, we built something neither of us could have created alone. Not just a family, though we did that. Not just a ranch, though we did that too. We built a principle into action, that desperate people deserve dignity, that children need love more than anything else, that family is built through daily choices rather than biological accident. Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. 34 years, feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. We've buried friends, celebrated grandchildren, weathered droughts and prosperity. Through all of it, the foundation stayed the same. Choose love over fear, help over judgment, connection over isolation. Margaret stepped forward with the official historical designation plaque. The state of Wyoming officially recognizes the Triple Creek Ranch as a landmark of social progress and humanitarian innovation. This site represents the transformational power of individual courage and the ripple effects of choosing compassion. May it stand as a reminder that the coldest darkness can give way to the warmest light when someone is brave enough to kindle it. As the plaque was unveiled, bronze mounted on Wyoming stone, bearing both the Cooper name and images of the ranch, the crowd erupted in applause that echoed across the prairie. But the most profound moment came after the ceremony, when a young woman approached Caroline and Daniel hesitantly. She was perhaps 25, carrying a baby, with 2 young children clinging to her skirts. "Mrs. Cooper? Mr. Cooper, I'm nobody important, just someone who heard your story. But I wanted to tell you," her voice broke, "I wanted to tell you that 2 years ago I was where you were, widowed, desperate, 3 kids, and nowhere to go. I was standing outside a boarding house in Billings, Montana, about to give up. Then I remembered your story, how you kept trying, how one person finally said yes. So I tried one more door. She gestured to a man standing nearby, watching with gentle eyes. This is John. He took us in, just like Mr. Cooper took you in. He married me, adopted my children, gave us a home. We named our baby Caroline after you, because your story 34 years ago saved my family today. That's how far your courage reaches. Caroline embraced the young woman, both of them crying. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah, you didn't need my story to be brave. You were already brave. You just needed to know that brave was enough. As the celebration continued into evening, as families shared meals and children played and stories were told, Caroline found herself back on the porch, the family's traditional gathering spot for 34 years. Daniel joined her, moving slower now, but still steady. Tired, overwhelmed, Caroline admitted. I never imagined that desperate morning would lead to this. That desperate morning led to everything, Daniel corrected. That's when we both stopped being alone and started being family. Their children and grandchildren gathered around them as sunset painted the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and rose. Thomas with his wife and 4 children, Anna with her fiancé and a life of purpose, James with the Morrison girl he'd finally married and their twin daughters, Elizabeth planning her own future, and in the meadow below 300 people whose lives connected to this place, this family, this moment when a cowboy had heard a desperate whisper and answered with courage. Mama, Elizabeth said softly, they want you to say something final, to close the ceremony. Caroline stood, Daniel supporting her, and looked out at the gathering. 34 years ago, I whispered into the darkness that my children were cold, she called out, her voice carrying across the meadow. Today I stand before you to say they're warm, they're safe, they're thriving, and they've spent their lives ensuring that other desperate families find the same warmth we found. She gestured to Daniel. This man built us a home, but more than that, he taught us that home isn't walls and a roof. It's the choice to love every day, regardless of circumstances. Home is commitment when things are hard, laughter when things are good, and the unwavering belief that together is always better than alone. To everyone here, whether you're family by blood or family by choice, whether you knew us decades ago or heard our story yesterday, you're part of this legacy now. You carry forward the principle that desperate whispers deserve answering courage, that broken people can build beautiful things, and that the simplest act of helping can change everything. She looked at the bronze plaque, at the ranch spread out before them, at the generations gathered. My children were cold. A cowboy built them a home, and together we taught the world that family is bigger than biology, home is stronger than buildings, and love is the choice we make every single day. Daniel's arm tightened around her waist. They're mine too, he whispered, just for her. 34 years later, they're still mine too. Forever, Caroline whispered back. And as stars emerged over Wyoming, as the celebration gradually quieted and families departed with hearts full and hope renewed, the Triple Creek Ranch stood as testament to a simple truth. One moment of courage can echo through generations. One choice to help can transform thousands of lives. One desperate whisper, answered by one lonely cowboy, can kindle a flame that never stops burning. The coldest darkness had given way to the warmest light, and the light would shine on through children and grandchildren, through families helped and communities transformed, through every person who heard the story and chose courage over comfort, help over judgment, love over fear. The legacy wasn't in the plaque or the ceremony or the historical designation. The legacy was in every child who found a home, every desperate person who found help, every broken family that became whole. The legacy was eternal, and it all started with a whisper in the darkness and a cowboy brave enough to answer, "My children are cold. They're mine too. Forever and always. They're mine too." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.